of the British parish, we can begin to layer that simplicity by asking some questions around who's British parish. And by doing so, we will be encountering some conflicts around the construction of the British parish, its presentation. And ultimately, as we progress, we will be encountering further questions of complexity about why write about the British parish. So it's the parish on this island of Britain. We could jump in anywhere. I am quite interested in the 19th century, so I'm going to throw out there somebody like Montague Burrows, the inaugural Chichor Chair of History at Oxford, who used archived materials at places like the Palace of Westminster and diocesan archives to begin to create and generate narratives of families that controlled parishes and manors. Another example of this would be the work of Steinman, who wrote about the manor of Amberfield inside the parish of Cudham. In 1851, he presented 70 or so pages to the journal Topographer and the Genealogist on this one manor within the parish of Cudham. Slightly variation from that is the work of Charles Carey, who wrote about the parishes of the Hundred of Bray, and what he was aiming to achieve in 1861 was an authentic and original history of the localities and institutions of the immediate neighbourhood, because that would be surely what was of interest to local people. So he's beginning to construct an idea of writing the parish as identity. And then we have Reverend Hancock at the end of the 19th century, who produced 400 pages on the fauna and flora, the history, the geography, the topography, the locality of the parish of Selworthy, a place he knew well as its rector, and the family he was connected to by bloodlines and marriages, the Dycatlans, who had controlled it for hundreds of years. Those who are sages in the topic of the British parish will look at my opening title and consider the fact of variation, because how is any of the British parishes comparable when we have such variety? And that's what we're going to look at now. So we have the parish of Writtle in Essex. It's 54 square kilometres. In the 1841 census, it had 2,521 people in it. Its next door neighbour is the classic small micro parish of Chignall Smealy, a whole 1.7 square kilometres and 94 people in the same year. We have here also Cudham in Kent, Boughton in Kent, as studied by Barry Ray in the 1990s. There's Selworthy with its whole 9 square kilometres, 505 people. England's largest reputed parish, that of Stanhope in County Durham, 220 square kilometres, 7,000 people. Then we're going to move north into the northern British jurisdiction, otherwise known as Scotland. And we have the parish of Old Macker, 50 square kilometres, 28,000 plus people. And we can pick out Cairney, slightly further to the north, almost 50 square kilometres, 1,638 people. Well, of course, we've mentioned variation. The variation is driven by those things those English antiquarians were writing about: the topography, the geography, the locality, its connectivity and networks. So we recognise that Writtle is on the borders of Chelmsford, whereas Old Macker in Aberdeenshire, 2 or 3 of its square kilometres contains half of the town houses of the borough of Aberdeen, and therefore half of the town's population. The rest of the square kilometres is large sprawling farmlands and grand estates. Meanwhile, Cairney in Aberdeenshire is in the remote Highland fringe. It's all about steep slopes, heavily forested, some nice rivers, some very good high quality farmland on those rivers. Now, variation changes though, and our concept of variation changes when we start to group our parishes together. And on this island, we do that at the next level uniformly as the county. So we've got Kent, its classic Bowen boundaries, 3,736 square kilometres. Its forces and structures over time generated 326 parishes for an average square size of 11.5 kilometres. We see something similar going to the west of Wiltshire, but when we go further north into Westmoreland, when the landscape is utterly different, the agricultural norms are different, even the early stages of parish formation were different, we end up with an average parish size of 18 square kilometres. And we interestingly see a similar size in Radnorshire in Wales. But again, go north into the northern British jurisdiction of Scotland, we end up with Aberdeenshire, 5,050 square kilometres. Its forces over the millennium produced 83 classic parishes for an average size of 61 square kilometres. Kincardineshire, one of Scotland's smaller counties, we're looking at about 35. So we've grouped at the county level, and we've begun to notice there are two things: Northern Britain and Southern Britain. Northern Britain, after the Act of Union, 77,933 square kilometres. By the end of the 19th century, when the process of moving from an ecclesiastical parish system to a civil parish system around democracy and local services and electing leaders, 871 parishes, in contrast to the 10,449 parishes of England, which is the vast bulk of southern Britain. So in terms of average square kilometres, we can see here the northern British parishes around about 90 square kilometres in size, whereas the English parishes 12.7. At which point I am confident about saying something around apples and oranges, merely based on the notion of size, and size when we're writing matters. We also need to take account of that there are these two sets of systems operating on these islands, and they affect the parishes and how they have been written about. So the operational models come down to differences in jurisprudence, church, and bureaucracy. These are significant for the writing of the parish because these are the formulae that create the background to the shaping of the parish, along with those other factors such as topography and geography. So we must recognise that after the Reformation, the Presbyterian and Episcopalian state churches created a different vision of what the parish was about and what they wanted to achieve and how they wanted to administer. In Scotland, by the 19th century, this is resolved into the Heritors Committee, made up of the local landowners levelling taxes upon each other to pay for the schoolmaster and the parish minister, one of these landowners may then also have been the patron for a couple of hundred years, or the crown may have served that role. By the end of the 19th century, by the beginning of the 19th century, many of these landowners were not adherents of the Presbyterian State Church of Scotland, nor were they regular attendees, and therefore we must look at the writings generated by the elders and their church minister. These are the people that attend and worship and run the parish, and these folk are responsible for the application of social services. You have an illegitimate child who produced the illegitimate child who's going to care for the illegitimate child. You have no roof, you have no food in your bowl. What can we do about that? All of which generates a different level of writing. Turning back to the recognition of the small number of classic parishes, 871, we must apply an understanding of that number to the presence of the three statistical accounts. These are writings done on the parish level, done as a uniform project in 3 stages, creating 3 snapshots through the 18th and 19th centuries. We can compare the 3 statistical accounts of Scotland to those individualistic bits of writing that we looked at earlier, produced by English antiquarians, and go, well, this is a uniform activity. Parish ministers, 871 of them, were written to on the same time scale and were asked to produce writings against the same general themes: local economy, local land ownership. We turn now to a recognition that our writing about the British parish has also been transformed into the digitised age, and we present here Chignall Smealy, remembering 1.7 square kilometres, as it appears in the cornerstone website of British History Online, and we see that parish churns out 65 hits, which are pillaged from the classic archive materials that Montague Burroughs would have been familiar with in the 19th century. In contrast, let's put in the northern British parish of Methelick, remembering it's going to be around about 60 square kilometres. It has a whole 14 hits in British History Online. This is a recognition of the different types of writing and level of writing and periods of writing, but it also recognises that the 3 statistical accounts of Scotland have not been entered into the British History Online process and have instead been digitized elsewhere, both academically and independently. We can do the same exercise with Chignall Smealy on visionofbritain.org.uk, where this parish has been presented in digitized writing, taking account of its births, marriages, deaths, and census materials, so that the public and historians can enter into this parish and understand its population, its industry, its social structure, and housing as developed by writing about the people through the 19th century. We can do the same exercise with a Scottish parish, which takes us to a place called Savok. And in Vision of Britain Online, we get a one-line entry that tells us its population is about 1,981 people in the year 1881, and this is lifted from a gazetteer of the British Isles. And we're left with the question, where is the birth, marriages, and death breakdown, the writing about all the people of the parish in the 19th century? I have been naughty in the selection of Savok. It is not one of the classic 83 Aberdeenshire parishes. It's a new creation of the 1830s and 40s, onto which was added bureaucratic demands by the state in the 1850s. We would like you to collect birth, marriages, and deaths as a new parish, and also conduct your enumerations. And then in the 1870s, the people were invited to vote in elected leaders to run their schools and generate further writing. So why this matters? I'm going to give you a 19th and 20th century perspective, which is that the writing of the British parish has fueled in the 19th and 20th century an understanding of Britishness as a more macro concept. And apart from Black Britishness, it has then been used to generate ideas about a North Atlantic culture at different periods of times, which is one of exceptionalism, and which hangs over us still today with ideas of Western Euro-Americanism as a developmentalism society to be expounded and looked up to. We can pick that apart through the contested English debate about parish and identity, as understood through concepts like rogation, beating the bounds of the parish markers. So this concept of the contended argument works if you have an average sized parish of around about 12.7 square kilometers. You can actually walk those boundaries. If we go up into Northern Britain, you are not walking the boundaries of a parish that is 60 square kilometers in size, let alone one that is 90 square kilometers in size. And remembering those are the average numbers. Now, a writer such as Shora, working with Scottish demographers Reid and Garrett in 2018, recognized this. And when they developed an idea to track migration and write about migration from parish to parish and place to place, they did not apply their model to all of Britain, only to England and Wales. So finally, we're going to be confronting this question of who's British parish, and we've been working our way through that. We've seen different types of British parish, and we've seen that in the writing and the concept of writing. Is it about people? Is it church? Is it bureaucracy? Is it about the record base? Below that is the even more important question of who sets the standard of the British parish. Now, Mitchison, a Scottish historian in the 1990s, essentially from her argument laid out that it is the English recorded parish that is the baseline. It's a confluence of historical forces and tensions in the 1850s, of which Montagu Burghs was part, which then said, well, we have all these records in England, so that's our baseline. And if you don't have records, then maybe you're behind in some way. We can see that argument again typified by somebody like Thompson in the 1980s, who says, I'm writing about Britain, but really I'm writing about England because, well, 83% of the population lives in England, so there you go. But that becomes a really interesting argument in itself. And we can see it in a really modern format in Moore's writing of 2022, where he wanted to write about the parish through its parish councils and the development of British democracy in 1894, when people in parishes went to vote for their parish leadership for the first time. And what becomes really interesting is that Moore completely forgets that Britain has two sets of systems, Northern Britain and Southern Britain, with two sets of churches, with two sets of forces, with two sets of different types of topography and geography and networking systems that have generated potentially different types of British democratisation. Instead, we're left with the presentation of a standard. This time,